Pile on the brown man's burden, and through the world proclaim that ye are freedom's agent, there's no more paying gain. And should your own past history straight in your teeth be thrown, retort that independence is good for whites alone. At the 1884 Berlin Conference, King Leopold II of Belgium seized the Congo Basin as his personal property. Leopold had promised to end the West African slave trade, but instead he bound the Congolese into forced labor on his rubber plantations. To ensure obedience, or sometimes just for the sake of pleasure, the king's sadistic men killed and maimed millions of innocent Africans. At last, in 1908, the international community forced the Belgian parliament to annex the colony, ending the worst abuses. Still, racist Belgian officials deprived the Congolese of education and forbade the Africans any voice in their government. But despite Belgian efforts to isolate their colony, by the mid-1950s, the nationalism sweeping Africa had found a voice in the Congo. In the face of mounting nationalist agitation, Belgium finally granted the Congolese the right to form political parties in 1958. However, because of the tribal nature of Congolese politics, only one party emerged with strong national support in the extremely diverse Congo. That party, the non-tribal Mouvement National Congolais, or MNC, was able to unite the Congo and triumph over Belgian colonialism. Its strength came not only from its pan-tribal, pan-African policies, but also from the vision and charisma of its leader, Patrice Lumumba. Lumumba, a former Congolese postal clerk and nationalist, rose to prominence in 1958 when African nationalists met in Accra, Ghana at the All-African People's Conference. Inspired by his contact with Kwame Nkrumah, the president and founder of Ghana, Lumumba formed his own Pan-African party, the Mouvement National Congolais. However, just as the Accra Conference was winding down, anti-Belgian riots erupted in the Congolese capital. A week later, King Baudouin of Belgium, seeing no other way to end the violence, promised the Congo independence. But the king had named no date. Failing to see the extent of Congolese unity, he still planned to hold on to the Congo indefinitely. The Belgians had hoped that the false promise of independence would pacify the Congo, but instead Patrice Lumumba and other nationalist leaders campaigned more actively for immediate independence. Fearing a revolution, the Belgians set a series of talks, the Round Table Conference, to begin on January 20th, 1960 in Brussels. The Belgians assumed that the Congolese would be too divided to secure independence. In particular, the delegates from the southern province of Katanga, more puppets of Belgian mining interests than representatives of the people, had vowed to oppose a unified Congolese state. But to the surprise of the Belgians, when the Congolese delegates landed in Brussels, they pledged to join together with Lumumba's MNC and demand immediate independence. Congolese unity, combined with a weakening Belgian economy and a rising anti-colonial sentiment among draft-aged Belgian youth, tied the hands of the king's negotiators. Once again, Belgium was forced to give in to Congolese demands. Elections were scheduled and Independence Day was set for June 30th, 1960. The Congo seemed to have done the impossible. A nation with only 2 years of political experience had triumphed over European oppression to elect its own government, led by the MNC. Lumumba, now a national hero, was elected prime minister. On Independence Day, King Baudouin addressed his former colony.
L'indépendance du Congo constitue l'aboutissement de l'œuvre conçue par le génie du roi Léopold II, entreprise par lui avec un courage tenace et continuée avec persévérance par la Belgique.
But Lumumba was unwilling to let Baudouin praise Leopold's oppressive rule.
Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera qu'à un noir, on disait tu, non certes comme à un ami, mais parce que les voix honorables étaient réservées aux seuls blancs.
This address, the Tears, Fire, and Blood speech, won Lumumba support from native Africans, but worsened tensions between his nation and Belgium. Worse still, just days after independence, the Congolese army, which had expected that Lumumba would Africanize the officer corps, mutinied against its old white commanders. Even though this violence was quickly halted with the election of black officers, Belgian forces still invaded the Congo. Although Belgium claimed that its army had only entered the Congo in order to pacify it, the Belgian presence ignited a new round of mutinies. Lumumba tried to restore order, but his efforts were stymied by illegal and unwarranted Belgian intervention. To the Africans, it seemed the Belgians were stealing back the independence given only a week before. In Katanga, they actually were. Katanga was not only the most industrialized province in the Congo, it also contained 60% of the world's cobalt, vast seams of copper and gold, and one of the richest supplies of uranium in the world. To ensure control of these resources, Belgium facilitated the secession of Katanga just 11 days after independence. Lumumba turned to the United Nations, but Cold War tensions froze the Security Council. European members were unwilling to harm their ally, Belgium. America refused to aid the Congo's leftist government, and the Soviet Union was only interested in using the conflict for propaganda. Months later, the United Nations soldiers did replace the Belgians in every province except secessionist Katanga, the area where the UN was needed most. The United Nations inaction left Lumumba with no choice but to invade Katanga. The invasion, combined with Lumumba's wartime restrictions of civil liberties, convinced his opponents that he had gone too far. Lumumba's chief rival in the Congolese government, Joseph Kasavubu, invoked an obscure law to remove Lumumba and his supporters from office. Lumumba in turn called on Parliament, which removed Kasavubu. Several attempts were made at reconciliation, but Kasavubu refused. In this power vacuum, Colonel Mobutu, senior commander of the Congolese army base in Leopoldville, seized control and placed Lumumba under house arrest. Lumumba attempted to reunite with his supporters, but was captured during his escape by Mobutu's soldiers. Then, with Belgian complicity, Patrice Lumumba was flown to secessionist Katanga, ensuring his death. On January 17th, he arrived, bound, badly beaten, and missing his glasses. Now, in front of cameras, he was beaten again, and forced to eat a transcript of his Independence Day speech. He was never seen nor heard from again. On February 13th, the Katangan government announced Patrice Lumumba had been killed. The world reacted in shock and outrage. Although Western governments saw Lumumba as a threat, to the people of the world he was, and still is, a nationalist, a hero, and after February 13th, a martyr. He had been killed by a firing squad commanded by Belgian officers. His remains were hacked into pieces, dissolved in acid, and burned. The Belgian government did not apologize for its actions until February of 2002. In the wake of Lumumba's tragic death, the Congo lapsed into a deadly civil war. Ultimately, power passed into the hands of the bloody dictator, Colonel Joseph Mobutu, who ruled by fear and violence. It is necessary to recognize Lumumba's role in the collapse of the Congo. His failure to Africanize the army gave Belgium the excuse it needed to intervene, and his increasingly authoritarian rule allowed his rivals to secure his ouster. But without Patrice Lumumba, the 1950s Congolese independence movement would have failed. He was crucial in uniting the Congolese people enough to force the Belgians to the bargaining table in 1960, and once there to grant independence. His leadership carried the Congo through the army mutinies and the economic crises that challenged the fledgling government. But for the actions of the Belgians and the inaction of the United Nations, the tragic collapse of the Congo could have instead been the triumphant birth of a free, democratic nation. In November 2006, the Democratic Republic of the Congo held its first free election since 1960. Nevertheless, violence still plagues the Central African country. Today, as Africa struggles under the yoke of poverty and oppression, just as it did 50 years ago, Patrice Lumumba is remembered as the embodiment of hope, unity, and the glory that should belong to Africa. His last letter, written shortly before his death, concluded, "Africa will write its own history, and to the north and south of the Sahara, it will be a glorious and dignified history. I know that my country, which is suffering so much, will know how to defend its independence and its liberty. Long live the Congo, long live Africa."